Hello, I'm Piers Ridyard, CEO of RDX Works, a core developer of the decentralized finance protocol Radix, a public ledger entirely motivated on bringing DeFi into the mainstream. Today, we are talking about some very interesting things that we have been working on for quite a long period of time. And we covered this in a roundtable that has already gone out about RadQuest. And in this one, myself and Matthew are going to be going much more into depth into the making of RadQuest. The reason we're doing this is a couple of reasons. The first is there was actually some really interesting design thinking that went into this that I think is relevant to many different Web3 DeFi applications that are thinking about creating user journeys, that are thinking about creating NFT systems, and also because it's a good story, quite frankly. Like, it was really fun to create it. And we went through a lot of iteration work, and it was also what some people call a dogfooding exercise. Dogfooding is when you consume your own product, and what this forced our team to do was to build against the tools that we had built, and that was also incredibly helpful and informative to everyone who was working on the project, and also beyond that, to the people who are building the tools. And so a lot of the things, some of the tweaks that you see in the wallet, some of the tweaks that you see in how we've thought about getting connections to your wallet, all this kind of stuff has also been informed by this work from RadQuest.
Yeah, it's funny. RadQuest is just launching, but it's funny. Like, RadQuest has been influential to other things that people have seen for like a year or so. Right. Just behind the scenes, to be like, "Ooh, yeah, RadQuest pointed out that this is a problem. We need to fix that." So yeah, it'll be fun to talk about.
So Matt, why don't you take us back to the start? When did this start, and how did we go from there?
Yeah, surprisingly far back. And it kind of gives you an idea of how we do product discovery, because it's like, people, they see the end result and they're basically like, oh, you must have started working on this 3 months ago. It's like, actually, like, there's a huge amount. If you want to do really good product development, there's a lot of time you put in to the thing before you write any code at all. Because if you just rush straight into be like, oh yeah, we think we know what this needs about, let's just start writing code, like 9 times out of the 10, you're going to end up building the wrong thing. So we do quite a bit of product discovery, and this is one example of that. But characteristic for me, I put together some slides. I hope this isn't too boring, but I've got a little thing here about the story.
The slides are never boring, Matthew. The slides are never boring. How dare you suggest otherwise?
And there are very few words on this. It's mostly just pictures to talk to. But yeah, going back, I mean, RadQuest in the beginning, the idea here is we knew that there was a problem we needed to solve. And this had been in the back of our minds going back even to like Olympia. And it was basically, this was the picture I chose for this, not to pick on Avalanche too much. It's not specific to them at all, but it's an example that if you look at onboarding into L1 networks, into crypto in general, the onboarding experience looks like this. In fact, this is like better than it used to be. Like, I mean, when I first got into crypto, it was sort of like, I was like, oh man, this is super cool. Like, I want to get into this. And it was basically like, all right, it was this gatekeeping thing. It's basically like, all right, you need to earn it. If you want to get into crypto, you're going to have to find the information, right, like learn all this technical stuff. We've now gotten to the point where most L1 networks have this. They've got like the quick start guide, and it's basically just the FAQ. And it's like, okay, read the FAQ, and it'll cover like, this is how the blockchain works, and this is where the wallet is. And it's very technical. It's very sort of, accurate, but I wouldn't call it an onboarding experience. Like, this is still the significant gatekeeper, because the vast majority of people, if you're saying, hey, Web3 is a super exciting thing, and you point them at this, they're going to go, yeah, this is not for me.
And like, honestly, this is a big reason that influencers are big in the space, right? Mm-hmm. Because it is so complicated. You need someone to take you by the hand. And like, the core principle here is show, not tell. Mm-hmm. And like, you need someone to just be showing you on a video the creating a new wallet, the funding the wallet, the going and doing your first interaction with the DEX, all of this kind of stuff, you're staking, because it's so easy to do things wrong. And I think that everyone who builds products, especially if they're technical products, especially if they're complex products, has the curse of knowledge. Mm-hmm. You don't remember what it was like to be a new user. You don't remember what it was like to come in. And like, this is one of the things that I love about all of our user interviews, about all of our user testings, is that you forget the most basic things about what people don't understand or don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the other reason why product discovery is so important, is because you have to actually test your theories, and you have to do that as early as possible before they're baked into a product that you've A, fallen in love with,
Right.
And B, built a bunch of code on, and then you suddenly got this like problem of sunk cost.
Mm-hmm.
And even though that most people know there's a sunk cost there's a sunk cost fallacy, right?
Mm-hmm.
It still doesn't stop you from being like, yeah, but I've spent 100 hours on this, 200 hours on this, right?
Right. Yeah, you have to keep yourself honest. This is one of the things that I do at Radix is basically whenever we have someone new join the team, I jump on them and I say, hey, welcome to Radix. Go use the wallet, go do all these things. And when you're due, have a notepad open and just take notes on anything that you don't find confusing. Some people really embrace it. They send me like a bunch of screenshots on a board and everything. Like, this is the whole thing I went through, and this was weird, and this I thought was really delightful. But I always take advantage of that fresh perspective, because it's really easy to lose that. Totally. So we knew this was generally a problem to solve, and it'd been in the back of my mind. We really got to come up, we had a lot of sort of things we needed to deliver, but we knew this is something that we needed to do properly to really have the kind of solution that we knew we needed. This is like the metaphor that I kind of like using here. It's like if you've seen Battle Angel Alita, there's this great scene. But basically, like if you think of crypto, or if you think of DeFi, and you go to someone and be like, DeFi is this amazing thing, it kind of feels to new users like this. It's like you're telling them about this magical city in the sky where new things are possible and you can do all this wonderful stuff. You're stuck here on the ground looking up at this and going like, how the hell do I get in there? Like you're telling me it's great, but I don't want to climb this rope. This is nuts. So this can't be the way it goes. And so I think for this to be mainstream ready, it needs to feel a little bit more like this, where it's like they've designed Disneyland has designed the entry to the Magic Kingdom to be as welcoming as possible. It's not sort of like, okay, you're going to have to figure out where the rides are and everything. It's like they've honed this down to a science where it's like Mickey Mouse literally hugs you when you're coming in. You get handed the map and everything, and then you can focus on the fun. So we need something like that for crypto. This is how it has to be. We have to get past that sort of tech focus phase where it's like only your tech geek friend is like, well, okay, I'll set up your computer for you and you can do some of this stuff. So the start of the project, when we were really like, okay, let's sit down and figure out how we're going to solve this problem, goes back to May of 2022. This is 16 months before the Babylon mainnet upgrade and before the Radix wallet released. When I say Radix wallet, I mean the mobile wallet that we're all kind of familiar with now, not the Olympia wallet. Back at that point, there was an all company get together, and we sat around, and I remember it was the last day of the company meeting, and I grabbed a few people. I'm like, let's get in a room and I've got this thing I want to talk to you guys about. And we ended up kind of whiteboarding this thing out in a couple hours. But and at that point, we walked out of this, notionally putting the name Radix Hub on it. But it was this idea of okay, we need something that's like a tutorial. It's like your first DApp when you're getting into this. We also need to link to these other things. So we need people to understand how to do staking and what we're calling the Explorer at that point, and how you're going to do various things. Also, our marketing team was thinking about how do we create engagement? How do we kind of reward people for doing stuff on the network? And we're like, maybe this is one product that does this stuff for us. And we were thinking this is Radix Hub at that point. Coming out of that, this was kind of the notion of RDX Hub, of sort of the goal. This isn't a design document, but it was we want this thing where you can take a new user or an existing user and you can throw them at this single thing and it will kind of take care of the rest for you. It's it'll show them, this is how you connect and transact with the wallet. This is how you use the dashboard. This is how this is how you're going to engage with marketing initiatives. Here's how you're going to use InstaBridge. Here's how you're going to use InstaPass and this kind of stuff. This was not final. Just sort of at that point, we were thinking this is a short list of things that we'd want to have the user go through.
Yeah, and I think it was always how do we give users the tools to confidently use the platform? Mm-hmm. And we realized that actually there was a bunch of disparate services, a bunch of disparate products that the user needed to be aware of. And the earlier they were, the less onerous your first interaction with an application felt like. Because mm-hmm. The activation energy required to use an application, a decentralized application, is directly proportional to how much effort you have to go through before you actually can use it. And in crypto, that's actually quite high. especially for new users. And we realized even at this point that there had to be this starting point that meant that users felt like they had all of the tools available to them. They had like they knew that there was a Swiss Army knife, and that they could now choose which of the tools that they would use when they're going to do stuff, rather than they're handed one tool at a time, or they go somewhere and it's like, oh, you need a screwdriver, and it's like, I've only got a knife. Oh, where do I get a screwdriver from? I've got to go back over here, right? And so we realized that sort of intrinsically from what we discussed with a lot of these DeFi projects that we've spoken to. Like, number 2 problem of DeFi projects that we spoke to during DeFi Summer was bounce rate of engaged users that wanted to use their application, but the activation energy was way too high to actually be able to go and use it.
Right, exactly. And it's like, the wallet is a really important part of it, but it's even beyond that. If you think about, it's like, I'm building a finance application where it's like, on my platform, you're going to be able to trade real world assets and do lending or whatever it is. Well, the vast majority of your users are going to need to basically know the notion of bridging tokens into the network. So it's like, they need to not just have the wallet, but they need to understand, where can I do bridging? Where can I do some of these basic functions, so that there's this base level of assumed knowledge that you can build your application on top of, rather than having to like start from the 0 point with every single user. Right. And I think another thing that came out of this, what you're saying about sort of, giving people the Swiss Army knife, was that I think one of the things that we knew pretty early on intuitively, but we didn't really know what form it was going to take, was that this thing in the middle should itself be a dApp. That it couldn't just be it could just be the Yahoo homepage from like 93, where it's like, all right, here are links to all these things, go figure them out. We really wanted this to be a guided thing. And the way to make it guided was to make it an active dApp where, you are, as soon as possible, using the wallet, identifying yourself with the wallet and going, great, I know who you are. I'm going to lead you on this journey and make sure you get these things done. And so, again, we really didn't know. At this point, we had no idea how deep that was actually going to go. We were just thinking that it might just be like, well, you connect your wallet and there's like a little checklist or something. We ended up going much further with it, but yeah. And actually another thing here, what's my next slide? Before I get into this, another thing, going back to something you said that we realized early on, was that it was going to be a really valuable dog fooding thing, because around this time we've been talking about this. We're like, we got to have that dog fooding thing. I remember Russ beating on this. Russ if we're not dog fooding, we're in trouble. And so we toyed with some like little internal things. We had like Serbi's Rads, and we had these little like toy dApps inside the company that would kind of play with the ledger a little bit, but we never really had that like a real production level dApp idea that made sense for us to build, but would also really exercise everything that we were working on. And remember, this was like a year and a half before Babylon and all this kind of stuff went live, but we were still thinking like, when we get to that point, we're really going to want to be confident in like, how should you use the wallet? How should crypto work? Right. And I think that like there's a story of a company, and I can't remember what company it is, where the CEO makes every single member of the team spend a day answering customer complaints. And there's a bunch of examples. Actually, Disneyland is one of these examples, by the way. Like all maybe this is apocryphal, but I think it's true that basically all the Disney executives, they got to get in the suit. You got to go to Disneyland, put on the suit, and you got to hug the kids. Right. And I think it's so easy to be abstracted away from this stuff. And if you're a tool builder but not a tool user, you don't actually understand the user fully. You can describe the problem, but you can't actually work out whether or not what you're building is only approximately right or is exactly right. One of the early founding principles of RDX was, if you haven't experienced the problem, you don't understand the problem. And we've always, throughout the history of the company, we've always been like, when DeFi was kicking off, we made sure that every single person in the company had actually gone and used DeFi, was actually an active user. And we a bunch of people turned into like full DeFi yield farmers and all this kind of stuff. But that's exactly what you needed. You couldn't intellectually appreciate it. You had to also use it. And I think this is key at every stage. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we I mean, it's jumping ahead to the end here, but a little bit. But in the end, we basically ended up creating a new internal development team, which is now called the DApp engineering team. Initially, we called it, I think, the services team or something like. No, it wasn't. It started the services team and then had a different name for a while. I can't even remember now. But basically, we wrapped a team around this product. They've also been the ones that have ended up building like the dashboard and some other things. But this was kind of like the keystone of being like, cool. You are the team that is going to experience the world through the eyes of our development community, consuming our tools.
Right.
And they've been basically like co-developing the tools as they've been going through it, which has been super valuable. So yeah, then I guess it's only a slight fast forward. It kind of surprised me when I was looking at this. It surprised me how soon after this we did this. I think we came out of that first meeting. We're like, holy shit, we really got to like jump in on this and see what we want to do. So like pretty immediately we did this thing in May of 2022, which was
I think off the back of that, we'd already done one sprint before. So this sprint is what's called a Google design sprint. In fact, I have it literally on my desk. It's the only book I have on my desk. And this is very, very well thumbed. It has it like page marks and all this kind of stuff because I always end up facilitating these. But the idea behind a Google design sprint is you sort of ideate, design, build, and test a product in a week.
Mm-hmm.
And the rules are pretty strict around it. You have to have at least 4 people and no more than 9 people. You have to have a room in which you will never be disturbed. You have to make sure that no one is doing work during the day. You have very strict hours in which everything happens, and then you have a very structured format to every single day. And it sort of feels crazy, especially when you're like, I am going to design, build, and put in front of customers by the end of this week something that just didn't exist at the start of this week. It kind of feels like crazy that would be possible. But we'd done one of these before. I think maybe 6 months before, a year before, we'd done a sprint. And we'd all been like, this is fantastically productive, and it's at the right and you need the right scale of problem, and you need the right scope of problem. Like, you can't do all problems with this, though Google would probably disagree with me because he kind of says it at the start of the book, or Jake would disagree with me. But there is definitely the right scale of problem for this, and it's a really great process. So anyone who hasn't done it, I highly recommend it. But the facilitator role is super important.
Yeah, you got to have someone that's confident enough to really like hold to the process, because it's really easy for it to turn into like a normal meeting where everyone's just kind of elaborating and you're not focusing. Yeah. But it is an amazing process, and the process, I believe it's basically the first thing, but basically what you walk in with is just a goal. Like and you spend the first like half day or something just defining what is the goal we're actually trying to achieve at the end of this with some product concept, right?
Yeah.
And the result of like the 2 key sprint goals that we had after a little bit of work here were these 2: was, can we make an engaging guide experience that people don't just skip? And can we avoid user frustration during onboarding? There's some other kind of like lesser goals that we're playing around with, but these ended up being kind of like the highlights for the thing.
Yeah. And one of the things I'd say on the sprint goals is when you're doing a sprint, it also gives you permission to be more adventurous. So like the sprint is like, you should also try out high risk ideas. If there's a high risk idea and a lower risk idea, the sprint is a good time to test the high risk idea as well. From the point of view of, you're going to spend a week. It could be a wasted week, but that wasted week allows you to test something with the right people in the room, focusing on the right thing. And in May 2022, Quest platforms didn't exist. Like, this wasn't a thing that anyone in crypto was talking about. And so I'm sort of foreshadowing a little bit, but you carry on that.
It's funny. I mean, you mentioned that it's sometimes it's a wasted week. I mean, I think the only time it's a wasted week is if you do it wrong. If you don't take the process seriously, you could waste a week on it. But I mean, I don't know if the book says this, but just having gone through a few of these now, my suspicion is that like 9 out of 10 of these, the conclusion at the end of the week when you come out of user testing is basically, nope, that idea that you had is no good.
Yes. Oh yeah, yeah.
And like, to me, that's that's a beautiful thing, because like having gone through a lot of engineering, before Radix and working at other companies and everything, I can tell you so many times where it would take us like more than a year and millions of dollars to reach that point. We go like, oh yeah, boy, that was a mistake. We shouldn't have. That no one wants that thing that we thought they wanted. And that is so depressing, and it's so wasteful. And like a startup in particular cannot afford that.
Right.
So like to me, like the fact that you can spend only a week to dismiss an idea is unbelievably valuable.
Yeah.
So like I always go into these things with kind of low expectations. Like we'll probably dismiss the idea, but then we can really set it aside and not worry about it. And then again, we'll get to the conclusions of this particular one, but it was
so someone said, I think it was actually Steve Jobs who said the job of the executive team, the job of the CEO is to say no to as many things as possible so that you can focus on the things that you say yes to. And like I think that this format is a great way of, if you've got like 3 or 4 people in the team who's going, we have to do this is going to be amazing, and it's constantly in the back of their head, like as a little itch going, this is important, we should do this. Right. It takes away some of that focus, and this is another great outlet for that. And
even if the concept at the end isn't, you're like, nope, that's the wrong concept, every time you'll still come away with a couple little bits. You'll be like, well, this concept wasn't right, but actually this little part of it was a big winner with people. And then I kind of go like, now maybe this is a different direction we can go. They're really cool. Right. Anyway, we're evangelizing the Google Sprint process. But so, to give you an idea what this feels like, we got a couple of photos from this where, again, this happens over like this is basically the first 3 days. Yeah. This is more or less like day 2 and 3, I think, right? Yeah. So in like day 2, you're kind of, well, I think this is like maybe end of day 2. So that's end of day 3. What you're on the left hand side, and then during day 4. No, beg your pardon. No, you're right. It's end of day 2, and then day 3 you spend all day storyboarding, and then day 4 you spend the day building, and then day 5 you test. So by the end of day 2. You've already got a bunch of concepts, and everyone builds different potential concepts around the goals. And we could go really deep into this, but we're not going to. And then you have like this process of voting, so that you can see these dots on this. Is this really cool wet method called dot voting, which means that you basically have no arguments about stuff. You just all vote on things, and you get a pattern emerging as to what is clearly people are going, yes, this is a good idea, versus something else. Yeah, in fact, I did this out of order because because what you do before you get to any of the concepts, there's a whole, I always find this to be one of the more interesting parts of the process, is that you basically, once you've got the goals, you go, what are other things you've seen out here that have solved this kind of problem in a good way? And it's usually in like completely different industries. And the cool thing is, if you get a bunch of people in the room that are quite diverse, in terms of like their responsibilities and everything else, they'll be like, oh yeah, I saw this thing over in like my knitting group. There's this great thing I saw, or like whatever, you get people that are like come up with things you'd never heard of. It's like, oh, actually that's a really cool idea. I'm like, one of them that we kept coming back to was Duolingo. This was like one of the big winners. We're like, Duolingo really gets this really nicely, where it's not adapt, but basically when you come into Duolingo, the tutorial is Duolingo. Like you literally are just immediately using Duolingo. And it's very goal oriented. You come in going like, I want to learn Spanish. And it's like, all right, you just immediately start learning Spanish. And then you get 3 steps into it and you're like, oh, this is easy. And now I'm going to commit to it and sign up for it. And now the little owl starts pestering you and everything like that. So we're like, this is we had a bunch of different points of inspiration, but this is one that we kept coming back to. Yeah. And then like the result of that is we came up with a bunch of different sort of rough concepts. And then this was kind of the picture of the one that was actually called RadQuests at this point. And we had some like rough ideas of what that might look like. And then people tend to put little sticky notes about kind of like what they thought was interesting about it. You do the dot voting stuff and all that. It's a shame that you picked one of the best drawn ones, because I also want to say to people that drawing is not an important skill here. Right. Some of the best ideas are often not drawn at all. All ideas are drawn, but some of the best ideas are not necessarily well drawn.
this is particularly well drawn, so it gives a bad impression. But yeah, everyone has to participate in this ideation phase, and the ideas that come through from this, like what's amazing about the flash demos, which is what you're talking about in terms of like showing other experiences that do this kind of thing, that is the goal, well, like start to get your creative juices working, and by the time you're getting to the point of drawing, like you've got so many ideas coming out, and then there's this whole way of like pulling more of them out of you, and then you get to this point, and so by the end of that day 2, you're like, this could actually be done, like this is actually possible.
Yeah, you feel like you have this like abundance of things to draw on to put something together. It's very cool. And that's what happens is you end up going to this stage where you put together a kind of a storyboard of what the essential part of a prototype of the thing would be. And this gets into something that I'm particularly sort of passionate about, that gets into like general product discovery process, which is the prototype that will get built. And we've got some images in here of what the prototype we built was. But there's this notion of a low fidelity prototype, which I think is really important, both in the sprint process, but just in general, if you're building any kind of product, basically, is once you figured out the goal you're trying to solve, and you think like, I think this is the essential part of the solution of that problem, there's almost always a way of prototyping that without building anything. Right. Without like writing any code or whatever it is, like whatever kind of product you're talking about, you can probably just go, it's like the classic thing, particularly for software products, is it's usually just the UI. You go, what 5 screens would the user experience that would make that user go from nothing to, that's a pretty cool product. Like, what are those 5 essential screens? And then you kind of storyboard that out. We actually went like overboard on this one. It was kind of outside the process, and it was a mistake, because you can see in here there's a bunch of like strikes through a bunch of screens. We basically did way too many screens. We're like, nope, don't actually need any of those to test it. All we need is like this. Right. And that's what we decided to build a prototype around. But you can do with anything. Like I've talked about this probably in a different roundtable, but briefly, I'm really proud of the one we did on this when we're doing Scripto also, where when we were first coming up with the notion of Scripto, we're like, how do you do a low fidelity prototype of a programming language? And the idea we had was, it's the documentation. That's the user's first experience with it. The developer is going to go, all right, what's this new programming language for smart contracts? All right, I'm going to read the docs site. And so we just wrote the docs for a non-existent language. And that was enough to get people going, wow, that's a different way of building smart contracts. That's interesting. And they started giving us feedback on this imaginary language. And then we're going like, okay, well, let's build a language that fulfills that promise. Yeah. The term that the book uses for this is the analogy they use is building a film set. Yeah, right. Like a film set does not have to be a perfect replication of the scene that you want to set in every direction. It's just the direction of the camera. And in this, it's the same thing. You're building just high enough fidelity for a relatively short test. You know, it's probably like 5 minutes of user time if they were just clicking through it, or less, and probably 10 minutes with how you actually conduct the test. And within that time, it's enough. It's always enough to test the core concept of what you care about. Yep. And people are remarkably adaptable to this sort of thing. Like if you're doing a user test, you literally can just hand them a piece of paper that you've drawn this crude sketch of a UI on, and they go, interact with this as if it was a web page. And people go, okay, I would push this button, and they'll tap it with their finger. Oh, okay, here's the next piece of paper. Oh, I tap that. You can totally go down to that level of fidelity, and it works just fine. Yep. So then after that, what's the next one? So we got this. Oh yeah. So here's our prototype. Now this is also another unfair one. I like almost didn't want to show this because this is so much higher fidelity than we really needed to do. And it's so much higher fidelity than you really probably even should do. Yeah. I guess the issue was that one of the people that we invited to this was our UX expert Aftab, who is like, he was kind of the mastermind behind how the wallet interaction works and all that kind of stuff. And we brought him into this. And, you know, not only is he a UX wizard, but he's just like a design powerhouse. So when we're doing our little crude sketches and everything, and then you're supposed to spend like, the team kind of gets together and they're supposed to use like, you know, you use like a Keynote or something to put together some rough prototype. Afterwards, like, oh, I'm just going to do this in Figma. And he would just like start ripping out screens that looked like a product. Yeah, he did us a little Figma tutorial at the start, and we were all using Figma to do this. But like, yeah, I'd say that this is way higher fidelity than is necessary. And like, I am still astounded that we built this in a day. This is literally a day. Yeah.
And the only reason you're able to do this is all the work that you do in the 3 days prior means that all of the questions, all of the content, all of the key like thinking points that are going to cause you problems are just out of the way, and now you just got to concentrate on build. It's like starting with the best possible spec possible. And as a result of that, we went pretty ambitious.
Right, exactly. So we built this thing that was like, the initial concept of this was like, okay, this is going to be a DApp. We really wanted to give people that sort of Duolingo sort of experience where it's like, we're not just going to talk about dApps on Radix. We're going to make it a DApp. So you're going to come in, you can connect your wallet right there, and you're just going to have these sequence of quests where we just lead you through actually doing the things that make Radix interesting. So it's like, you're going to get started, you're going to figure out, you're going to get your wallet so you can get some loot in your wallet. And then you had the hairtastrophe. This was this idea where you're going to get like, you're going to give Piers a bottle of conditioner.
No, it was a jar of hair gel, and like,
right. And we're going to make it an NFT.
Everyone loved that particular, like in our user test, that was like very highly. And then one of the users was like, "Are you Piers?" And I was like, no, I'm not, because I wasn't introducing myself as Piers, because we'd used the name Piers, so I had to introduce myself as someone else. Because the whole point in the testing is that you have to, when you're doing a user test with a user, you have to separate the person who's doing the interviews, which again, I normally conduct the interviews in these things when I'm involved. You have to create enough separation between the product and the person who's doing the interview, that the person who's being interviewed doesn't feel like they're going to be directly insulting the person on what they're looking at, because there's a lot of like social etiquette stuff with people you just met, and like not wanting to be too critical and stuff like this. So you have to create the separation. So I was like, no, I'm not Piers, that's not me. But yeah, it was very, very liked as an interaction point.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that there were sort of these essential elements of this, of like, it was, when you were going through this, you were going to be interacting with actual assets on the network. We knew that had to be an interesting thing. It was like that, because this is how you make Web3 real to people. It was like we weren't going to just talk about this jar of hair gel just because to make a joke. It'd be like, you're actually going to get an NFT in your wallet. You're going to have that thing there, and then you can give it back to somebody else. So we had some of these kind of core elements that we ended up elaborating a lot more in the real thing. We didn't end up actually using this as sort of the UI, but there was an interesting concept here with the chat interface, which was in the testing was a winner, actually, like this idea. But I think the thing that was important about it was the why people thought it was a winner. It wasn't the specific design. It was the fact that people were like, this feels very personal. It feels like this isn't like, oh, there's a company that's dumping information on me or I'm being marketed to. It feels like there's someone that cares, that's trying to explain something to me because they're passionate about it. And that ended up becoming a really important element that we carried forward and everything. So it was a really fun. And I guess to jump to the end of the story, I mentioned that 9 out of 10 of these things are actually like, yeah, the product doesn't make sense. I was overwhelmed. This is still to this day is the only sprint that I've gone through where it was sort of like, this was clearly a winner. It was like we went through the interviews, and basically every single interview, I wouldn't say every single interview was 100% positive on every single thing, but the vast majority of the people we tested with at the end were like, you can probably see in here somewhere mentioning radar. I forget where it says. We kind of obscured it.
RadQuest, yeah, I think we do talk about radar.
Yeah, here's the radar wallet. Yeah. So we were kind of talking about this as the radar network, so people wouldn't, look it up afterward. And at the end, we had like a bunch of people once you finish the test and we kind of wrapped up, and we say like, great, thanks so much for your time. We'll follow up if you have any questions. And people go, hey, before I go, is this radar network thing? Is that real? Can I like go use that? And like all of us in the room are like, holy shit, they actually care. They actually wanted to, even with this like basic prototype, they just went through a few screens. They actually care about this product.
Yeah. It's like, and like that's actually a super important point of a sprint is you never ask people what they think. You always go through what they're experiencing. So like, there's a saying in Google Sprints for this kind of user interview, feedback is worth pennies on the dollar, but reactions are pure gold. And so there's a very specific way of structuring these interviews where you get them basically to talk out loud as they're going through, and you get to sort of see when are they wondering about something, when are they stuck, when are they lost, and those are the key points that you want to be picking up. But one of the things that you should never ask is like, do you want to, if when this product comes out, do you want to find out more about it? Like, do you want to be kept in the loop on this? You never
Because
are.
100% of people be like, oh yeah, it seems cool.
But one of your biggest tells on any of these user interviews is if at the end of it they say, of their own volition, without prompting, without any like intonation on it, that they want to know when this comes out. And I think like I think it was like 90%, 90% of the people that we did the user testing with were like, I want to know when this comes out.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably going to be the strongest initial sprint reaction I think I may ever see. I'd like to see that again, but it was just such a clear winner. It was great.
Yeah, it was very cool. It kept me happy even as I walked. I got COVID after this, and I was like stuck in my room for like a week after this, but I was still just like buzzing with the glow of this going so well.
Yeah.
And but I mean, you definitely still get negative feedback. You still get like you get this like database of information about sort of places where you can saw off corners. And I mean, RadQuest ended up being quite a bit different than this in a lot of ways, but you kind of you get the essential element of the things you need to focus on after that point. So it was a very, very cool experience.
I just like the fact that this was well before ChatGPT came out, and chat interfaces that we were testing with, like there was definitely like decent engagement on the idea of a chat interface and it being a human and there being a face behind it and it wasn't a bot. Like even though it's like it's a cartoon of Matt, people really engaged with like the idea of them interacting with someone rather than something, and it just being a way of like delivering data to you and information. It was like it was a conversation, or it was an interaction that felt human.
Yeah, quite true. So we knew we had something here, and I think we came out of this. There was after this, I think there was a lot more planning about, wow, this is really something that we can do. We have a pretty good idea of what the form of it would be, but we were essentially early on it. Essentially, like at this point, we're like, cool. I think one of the key things about it is we realized how important the mobile experience part of it was. Right. It was the fact that because like back then, I'm trying to remember I think back then we even prototyped it. No, we assumed a mobile wallet interface back then, which is funny because this was again 16 months before we even released the Babylon wallet, let alone the mobile support that we just released a month ago.
Yeah.
Like back at this point, we were like, we know we're going to need mobile DApp support at some point, and it was basically the easiest thing to prototype. So we just kind of built it that way, where you're switching between this like simulated early version of the wallet, like just based on like rough prototypes.
No, I think at this point we definitely had the mobile user onboarding flow. Because we were able to, that was the other thing that was key for me that came out of this, was how easily users went through that process.
Yeah. No, we had that right. Exactly. We had we had Aftab's early UX flows for the wallet, but we were doing everything on mobile as if you're going through your mobile browser because we didn't want to have to mess with this two screens.
It was assuming that Radix Mobile Connect already existed, and it was assuming basically how we thought the interactions might look like.
Right. And it was kind of a convenience thing at this point, but I think one of the bits of feedback that I remember taking away from it was also that like most people are going to want to do this mobile, particularly for something like this, because you want to have this really low barrier to entry. Be like, probably most people are just going to be starting on a Twitter ad, be like, what's this thing? Tap. And if you're not if you can't just tap and you're in RadQuest and then you're doing stuff with the wallet, there's this friction point. So it's like, even though we knew we needed to start with a desktop experience for DeFi, because it's like we're creating this for people that are already in DeFi and already wanted a big, it's like, I know what dApps I'm using, I want to be able to see it on a big screen. We were shooting ahead towards this phase where it's like, okay, we're going to be going outside that bubble a little bit. And once you go outside that bubble, you've got to have the mobile support. So I think this was part of, this was also like at the end of the last bull market. There was a bunch of stuff going on, but we basically came at us. We're like, this is awesome. We're going to do this at some point. And we put it on the shelf. And we kind of went through, we got through a lot more development. We got through the Babylon release, the initial wallet release. That gave us this huge volume of feedback from the community. We started getting a feel for what was more important than other things and what the timing on the next steps were going to look like. And then kind of fast forwarding a little bit, we decided to pick it back up off the shelf at the time, basically when we're like, okay, I think we're now at the point where we could build this and time it so that it's going to be ready as soon as we've got the mobile experience ready on the wallet, because that's the right time to introduce it. And so that was around August of 2023. We actually picked the project up before that, but that was the beginning of the kickoff with Ustwo, which I'll talk about. I think it was probably a couple months before that we're like, let's really move out on this. But the Ustwo thing was one of the very first things we did. And the reason for that, so Ustwo is a game development company and a design studio that we chose to work with on this. And when we picked the RadQuest project back off the shelf, we realized that even though we weren't building a game, it very much had to have that same kind of experience. It's like Duolingo. Like Duolingo it's not a game per se, but it feels like a game. It's gamified, as they say.
Edutainment.
Edutainment. Yeah, exactly. In fact, Us2 likes using the term play thinking. They don't like gamify. Yeah. Okay. So they like applying play thinking to other applications.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a cool term. So basically, go ahead.
I think there was also this core idea of if this was going to be accessible to everyone, it had to have a very distinct brand style to it. It had to have a very distinct personality to it.
Right.
And we couldn't think of any other, like, a better organization than an organization that specialized in the concept of gameplay to do that. Because there's a whole design language that goes with that.
Right. This wasn't just going to be like, okay, this is the Radix brand, and it once again would just start feeling like a fact page for Radix, and it would feel like this boring thing. We're like, no, we really want to create something that stands alone and is completely focused on creating this great experience. And once you've gone through that experience, then you can be turned over to the Radix network at large. So AFTAB did quite a lot of surveying of different game development companies and design houses who could do this work for us. And Ustwo is who we ended up with. It was a really great project working with them. The enthusiasm and kind of I don't know how to put it, like, I'm not going to mention any of the names so I can say it, but like there were a lot of the game development and design houses we talked to where it was a little bit of a kind of like a cynical response. It was sort of like, okay, these are the rates we choose, that we charge for our services. Here's the process that we follow. If this is interesting to you, we can go to the next stage. Whereas talking to the Ustwo folks, it was immediately like, hey, what you guys are doing something kind of interesting. And like, how are you approaching this? They were asking us questions about like, what are you doing here and stuff like that. Like they were immediately kind of wanting to play with this problem we were trying to solve, which was really important, I thought. And then on top of that, their portfolio is just really amazing. Like, if you haven't played Monument Valley, that's won a bunch of Apple Design Awards, and it's a great little mobile game. So much fun. And so like just the design style that applied to everything, that was very accessible, very like it's very easy for crypto stuff to have its own sort of visual gatekeeping, because crypto stuff always tends to fall in this mode of like the cyberpunk aesthetic,
right?
Which, I mean, I like the cyberpunk aesthetic, but it's not for everybody, right? Like we wanted something where it's like, it doesn't matter who you are, you can feel like, oh yeah, there's a place for me on Radix. And so we wanted something that was a lot more open. So Ustwo is fantastic. So we kicked off with them in August 2023. So that's to put it in context, that was 11 months before the release of mobile DApp support in the Radix wallet. So we were in development on that. Well, that was, at that point we had, I'm trying to remember where that was. That was like, we knew we had the basic concept of mobile app support, but we were still kind of in the deep phase of working out all the edge case. Well, there's a whole other separate story about mobile app development that I won't go into, but it's like we knew roughly what the experience was going to be like, but it definitely wasn't working yet. It wasn't like we had a secret prototype of this working or anything. It was just, we kind of went going, we know that's going to be a thing, design around that assumption. And us too, we had our own kickoff with them, which was kind of like the sprint process in some ways, but a little bit different also, kind of was like tuned to the way they work. They started with this board of basically everyone kind of having it was like the goal statement. We had everybody involved, both from their team, and then we had some key members of the RDX team that were coming up with like, what do we think the wins that we could get out of this project would be? Like what would good results look like with a well-implemented RadQuest? And we came up with a whole bunch of these things, and then we started kind of putting them on this board and kind of these two axes. I'm trying to remember what it was. It was like something about I forget if it was like implementation complexity versus value or something like this, but there's kind of this mapping that helped us kind of classify these things into what was more important.
I think what was really interesting about this process, and I think was like sort of really high quality of us too as well, was their whole stakeholder management piece. Like they went and interviewed everyone in RDX who might care about some outcome of RadQuest, and like every department has a different set of things that they're hoping that this is going to produce. And so that happened before you did this, was like they actually spent, I think, like 1 or 2 hours with each of the senior team members, even though it was Matt who was the main person who was interfacing with them, to make sure that they had got all the key stakeholders understanding of what was necessary for this to deliver as well.
Yeah, like Adam in particular on the marketing side had a ton of input into that level of sort of like, look, this is how we want, when people come out of this, this is the sort of impression that we want people to have of Radix and the Radix brand.
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of like really useful stuff that helped guide kind of the broad direction of this. Then there was also, this was another thing. This even goes back to the original sprint. I haven't really talked about it, but we also got this very clear idea of the target user for this. And there's really, it's a little bit like you're supposed to always just have one target user in mind. And we really do, but it's sort of a primary and a secondary for this. But we've had these categories that I think this is also something that Adam came up with like years ago, of these different categories of crypto users. And these were 2 of those categories, which was, one of them is the crypto activated user. Crypto activated user is someone who is like, they've got a Coinbase account or they've got a Binance account. They own some Bitcoin. They maybe think they've made a smart play on something else. Maybe they got a little Ethereum, maybe they got a little Cardano or something, because their friend told them it's cool. But that's pretty much where they stop. They've never used a real self-custody wallet. They never touched MetaMask. They probably never heard of DeFi, but they're just kind of into the coin layer. So that's sort of the crypto activated user. And then the other one is the crypto enthusiast. So that's like the next layer down. These are people that they definitely have used MetaMask. They've done at least some amount of DeFi. These aren't like full degens, but these are people that sort of like they've done a swap on Uniswap for sure. They probably own some NFTs. They probably trade 5 to 10 coins that they think are interesting, particularly when the market is bullish. So it's like that kind of profile. And we have extremes outside of that. You have like I forget what we call the other categories, but there's like
crypto curious is on the left hand side. So crypto curious is people who like are familiar with the concept of crypto, and have maybe even opened an exchange account, but they haven't actually bought anything yet. So that, like, they'll listen, Bitcoin or something's come on their tweet, on their feed. Sometimes they'll like go and look at crypto influencers, maybe they'll watch some influencer videos, things like that, but they aren't yet engaged. And then you've got crypto activated, then you've got crypto enthusiastic, and then you've got crypto pro. And crypto pro goes into sort of like 2 categories. One is like people who is actually their job, and other people who spend like significant proportions of their time doing stuff in crypto. So like this is when you get into like people who are like professionally yield farming, like either for themselves or because that's actually the only thing that they do, and are like super deep doing governance processes in DeFi applications, like helping with community building, like that deep. And I think that the reason that we've always thought about, that we realized that RadQuest had to work for these two audiences, is that we knew that the first people who would use RadQuest would be the crypto enthusiasts. They would be the first people that would be the first touch point on it. But the crypto activated was the much bigger market by far. So like I recently did a check on this. There's 420 million exchange users. 420 million crypto exchange users.
That's a lot higher than I would have guessed. That's crazy. 420
million. So almost 500 million crypto exchange users. That's mad, right?
Yeah.
And there's only like 2 million like Web3 DeFi users. And it's harder to get numbers on that because a lot of the wallet numbers are inflated and all of this kind of stuff. But like actually active in that, it may even be lower than 1 million. I think that one of the DeFi projects I was looking at recently, GMX, they have less. At the point I was looking at it, it was maybe have changed now, but they had less than 10,000 weekly active users, and they had like a TVL of hundreds of millions of dollars. So like, you've got this very small group within crypto that is like the crypto pro. You've got a larger group, which is the crypto enthusiast, but still like in maybe the single digit millions. And then you've got crypto activated, which is in the hundreds of millions. And so we realized that those two audiences had to be catered for.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think, specifically in terms of product development focus, as you said, crypto enthusiasts was like the must do. It's like, we know the first people that are going to be coming to Radix when we launch this thing was going to be enthusiasts, basically people that are like, they're already using other networks, and we're trying to tell them like, hey, come check out Radix. It's a lot more interesting than the networks you've been using. It's got to work for them. And it had to explain to them the unique things about Radix, which, it's like we have to get over that hump that we always see with, like, I still love that meme with the little the bird and the cracker, where it's basically it's like, hey, here's Radix, here's this brand new thing, and the bird goes, oh, get that away from me, and then it like tastes it, and it goes, like, the eyes dilate, and it goes, oh my god, I want that. So it's like we run into sort of personal interactions and trade shows. We run into this all the time. We go, hey, welcome to Radix. Our wallet works completely differently than you're used to. Our smart contract language is brand new. And people go, are you crazy? Why aren't you just doing the same thing as everybody else, but making some metric better? And then but if you can actually get them to sit down and like use the wallet for 2 minutes, they go, oh, that's why you did it that way. This is much better. So like the whole point is we needed to be able to appeal those people with RadQuest and make it scalable. So it's not just like you and me, Piers, having these conversations. It's like you just throw them at RadQuest and they get the eye dilation experience.
And it's also about pacing. I think pacing is really important, because like when if you've used other crypto networks, the thing that you often want to do is just get straight to the reason you've gone into a new crypto network, if you're a crypto enthusiast, isn't because you want to experience a new wallet. Like the wallet is just the hassle thing that you have to go through. Getting the tokens is the hassle thing you have to go through to go and actually use, that DApp, that DEX, that whatever it is, right? And for people to get that like moment where they go, ooh, this is different and it tastes good, you have to actually pace the first experience in the correct manner, that they cognitively recognize what is being presented here is different and why they should pay attention to it. And one of the things that you say a lot, Matt, is, and I talked about this in the round table as well, is it's not about getting the fastest experience. It's about getting the right pace of experience to get the user to the end state that you most care about, right? So like, it's not about getting the user to download the wallet as quickly as possible. It's getting the user the context of why they should care about what it is that they're about to download, by getting the buy-in of interest and the attention that's necessary to get them to the point where you can actually earn the right to show people why something is different and why something's interesting, why should be paid attention to.
Right. It's the shortest path to understanding. You don't just want to make it so you're like, okay, you can click the buttons and get the thing, but then at the end of it, they go, okay, I click some buttons. This doesn't mean anything to me. It's the shortest path to the user going, oh, I get it.
Right.
So we had to achieve that with crypto enthusiasts and make sure that worked really well. But then we also wanted to design as like a secondary audience. We wanted to make sure that this would scale into the crypto activated people. We wanted to make sure that as those people started coming in, they were also going to have a good experience. And it would allow us to sort of, as Radix begins to reach outside that crypto bubble into that much, much larger audience, we wanted something where it wouldn't be like, okay, now we need to come back and do like a new RadQuest that's designed for them. And so this was one of the challenges was really like, can we do something that serves both? And the answer is actually, it's yes, because actually a lot of the things do really overlap between those things. Like in terms of like learning things, like if you're Radix is so different that in some ways you're going to be learning Radix anyway, even if you've been doing DeFi before. It was really more kind of like the front end understanding. It's more like if you're coming from another L1 network, you have to set this expectation pretty early on. It's sort of like, hey, I know you've done 10 different networks before, but just expect Radix is different, but you're going to like it in the end. And then the user goes, okay, I'm skeptical maybe, but I'm listening. Whereas if you have someone that's coming in from like, from Coinbase or whatever, you have to kind of go, hey, welcome to Web3. I know you maybe heard of this term, but you don't really know what it is. This is why it's cool. And you're going to be using the first network that does it right. And then once you get past that kind of initial frame setting, then a lot of the rest of the flow ends up being really common, which is good.
Right.
So other things we went through. So yeah, similarly, we kind of came out of this and started putting together different. It's like, I mean, they also do a pretty aggressive process. And this is obviously working with people that are professional game designers. So they have this one day where basically there was a bunch of, we had, I think, 5 different teams, and each team was half us 2 people and half RDX people. And you literally would like design a game during that day, just from scratch, to be like, what's this game about? And you'd have to come up with screen prototypes. And then literally, as I said, you remember I said that you can put like a piece of paper in front of someone and they'll tap it? That's exactly what we did. We literally would just put pieces of paper and have people play the game, which was pretty interesting to see happen. And there was some really interesting testing that came out of that. I mean, we started with, at the phase that like what you're looking at right now, we tested this internally to us too. So we pulled in people that were like completely unassociated with this project, and people that had, in some cases, like never heard of Web3 or didn't really touch crypto at all, and threw them at this and got some feedback. And then in a little bit of a later phase in the thing with us too, we started opening it out up to people outside the company a bit, and we got some really interesting learnings out of that. I guess maybe 2 in particular that I'll pull out of that I thought were cool was, one of them was, I'll talk about this a little bit later in some of the conclusions, but like the NFT thing was really a lot more compelling than we thought. We were playing around with the idea of like, oh yeah, there's going to be, we knew the hair gel thing was kind of cool. So we kept like introducing this concept, like what part does this play? And this kept coming, as soon as you mentioned, be like, hey, you're going to get this thing and put it in your wallet. People go, oh, is that thing you're giving me? Is it collectible? Can I like combine it with other things? Like, how many of them also out there? Or is there, they wanted to compare and they want to know if they're valuable and all this kind of stuff, just naturally.
Right.
Because basically people have this really strong built-in collector instinct. And it's driven by different things. It's really fun watching it. Like some people are really driven by the competitiveness. It's sort of like, oh, can I get like a better thing than other people have? And then you have other people that are basically like, I want to know what all the things are and tell me how I can get all of the things.
Right.
It's like the Pokemon instinct, right?
Yeah.
So like,
and you also get the completioners as well, the people who just want to complete all the things. It's like I want to do all the things I can, because that creates dopamine for me, in the same way that checking something off a to-do list creates dopamine for people, which is why to-do lists are so powerful, right? And so it's like it's
so yeah, this was exciting to us, because we're like, if this is creating the kind of engagement and pull and like desire to move on in the thing that we want, the great thing is, if we're doing these NFTs, these aren't just game concepts.
Right.
All of these things immediately are going to be like, and this, I remember having a conversation with the Ustwo folks. Like we had to kind of, they're so used to the traditional gaming world. We're like, okay, like we're going to blow your mind here. I remember we sat down with them one day. We're like, okay, like all of the little, the game assets we've been talking about, imagine if all of those are actually real things that you can hold outside the game. And they were like, wait, what do you mean by that? We had to like go through it a few times with them. And we're like, and then finally they're like, so like if me and my friend were doing this, you mean that we could just like trade stuff directly without the game? Like, yeah. Like, oh, this is cool. And then they like really like the Web3, the open mind moment happened for them. And then we started really exploring that concept. So this was a really powerful thing that came out of the testing. The second one was kind of like the design sprint thing of like the negative feedback, where naturally we got these game designers that were creating these really compelling worlds. One of them was sort of like, you're stranded on this planet, you have to build your rocket, and then once you've built your rocket, you can launch into space, and the rocket is kind of like getting the wallet. And we came up with all these cool metaphors. Or another one where it's like there's a little like bird here, and there's another one where you had to like feed your bird and it would grow up, and that was going to become something that became an NFT. And it was all this really sort of clever stuff. And when people went through the prototype, they're like, oh, this is really fun. I really like this world, and I want to know about this character. And like, they're super good at doing this. And then at the end of it, we'd be like, great, how do you feel about the Radix network? And they'd be like, what's the Radix network? They go, oh no, but you remember earlier on when we said that this is kind of like this is kind of like a wallet, and this is kind of like an asset? And they'd be like, yeah, I didn't pay attention to that at all. I was just playing the game. I was just interested in the bird and the rocket ship.
Right.
So what we learned was basically like, you can't over gamify. You can't invest too deeply in this like abstracted narrative, because even though it makes for a successful game, it actually makes that, when you talked about like what's the shortest path to understanding, it actually extended that path.
Right.
People be like, basically like what they understood the metaphor, and then they had to understand what the metaphor was trying to explain.
Right.
Where it's like, and basically what we came back with is actually it's better if we use some of these, we can have characters and we can have a little bit of a world, but those things need to be talking directly about the Radix network.
Right.
Like if you've got like a guide animal in here, which we'll get to, the guide animal needs to be aware that Radix is a real thing and it was really built by people and you can actually do stuff and just talking in those terms rather than build an extra metaphor. So that was a really, really important one because that we ran into that even in the early testing, like the Google Sprint. Like we had a couple people who were like, oh yeah, RadQuest is really cool. They're like, can I keep playing this? Like they were thinking of it as a game and they didn't really realize like, no, there's this whole network that you're going to be interested in. Oh, okay. And then, this was actually an example of one of the tests. Like one of these games, we did this whole thing on a whiteboard and you kind of lead people through playing the game on this. This was actually the rocket ship one. You can see that I really liked that one. The rocket ship one was cool. I was like almost sad that we didn't do it, but it was like, again, it was like the metaphor was overpowering the narrative. Then Ustwo also, they did the thing they do very well, which was explore the brand stuff. So we gave them this kind of dump about like, how do we want people to feel about Radix? What sort of our brand values? And it really got into, it's every design. I've worked with a bunch of design companies over the years, and they all do this. They all do be like, all right, tell me about your favorite brands, and like what are the list of values for your company and all that kind of stuff. The difference is that Ustwo actually produce something meaningful out of it. Like every other time I've done it, it's the companies come up with sort of like, okay, here's like the most obvious result of all this input. That basically what they're trying to do is just like satisfy the stakeholders. It's basically like on paper, it looks like your money has been well spent. Yeah. It's like, yes, they incorporated all of our feedback and they produced the result, and this is, great. We can sign the check. Ustwo actually cared about the results. So they started really thinking, like they would push us. They'd be like, it's like, maybe we want to like kind of break out of your normal color palette, and maybe we want to like minimize the Radix branding as much as possible, but create this very thin link so it's not unfamiliar when people jump over. And they started exploring interesting color palettes and different brands. They started getting into like a lot of stuff with like textures, which was kind of an interesting thing. They were looking at other crypto networks, and everything was very like sterile, very like flat and cyber and all that kind of stuff. And they're like, what if, it feels like you guys want something that's a little bit more organic, something that's more welcoming, more accessible. So they started exploring all this stuff. This was one of the best. So getting back to like starting to get to some of the conclusions of this, when I mentioned that we found this NFT thing was really interesting. This was kind of like the key summary of a thing that we discovered here, which was basically collect and combine was a super powerful concept that we need to introduce. This idea that as you're going through this, the user should feel like they can collect things by going through these quests and having that collection be real and actually held in the wallet, but then also not make it feel like it was one way. Like express this concept in Web3 that like things can move in between dApps and like you can combine them and I own them and I can customize what I want to do. So we're like, we have to find a way of expressing that in the RadQuest experience. So collect and combine and it being kind of the theme for that.
Yeah, I also think this idea, I really like this idea because I think that it's something you see in gaming a lot, but when you come to physical collectibles, this is obviously really difficult. But Web3 adds this extra element in which you can have the ability to not just collect, like you want to combine to do things, but you can collect on the ledger, but also in the game or in the experience, but you can then also trade with other people to get to the thing that you want to then be able to do the combination of things. And I don't see many games who have this idea of there being a secondary place in which you can do something that then affects what you're doing in the game or what you're actually able to achieve. And I think this is a distinctly Web3 enabled thing for NFTs that I think is really interesting.
Yeah, I think you're just starting to see particularly some mobile game companies doing freemium stuff. They're just starting to understand this, of saying like you can create a more passionate community around your game if you release the control a little bit. Basically, like, these things can take on a life that you are in control of, and you can actually contribute back to the game, and you can build your own things outside the game that interact with the things that can move in and out of the game. I think I really think this is going to be an exciting thing for the gaming sector to explore in the coming years. And we wanted to introduce some of those early elements here. I mean, I'm even hoping that RadQuest on its own will inspire some people to think about building not just the educational experiences, but actual games that take advantage of some of these things.
Yeah, and also like I think there's some really interesting ideas about cooperative play here that are it's not explored in RadQuest, but definitely could be explored, where you can't actually achieve things within the game unless you are cooperating with other people, and the way that you cooperate is by combining things that both of you own, but you can only own there is no way of on your own owning all of those things. The only way of owning all of the things or being able to do all of the things is by working with other people. I think there's some really interesting stuff there as well.
Yeah, we even have a very small amount of that in RadQuest. I don't have a slide about this, but we are doing a kind of a cool thing in RadQuest where we have a referral system, and everyone is familiar with the normal referral system thing where it's like, okay, here's your referral code. You entered in when you come in here. If someone else enters the referral code and they sign up with their email, now you get your little reward. This is what like everybody does. What we realize is we could do that same sort of thing with a referral code, but what we want to do is make, if you're referring your friend into Radix, we wanted you to be part of onboarding that user.
Right.
And so you'll see in a referral system that basically the way we set it up is when the user comes in, they need to go through the basic quests. Before they are able to join your quest party and finish the quest, and then you get your reward. And what this does is it basically incentivizes people. It's sort of like, look, don't just send the code out to your friends, sit down with them sometime and just be like, hey, this is really cool. I'm going to show it to you. I'm going to send you code. You're going to sign up, and then I'll lead you through. I'll like make sure that you get your wallet set up and everything, and then we'll get our reward at the end. So like you build, it's a very small, subtle thing, but it builds this greater sense of like community and this feeling of you are participating rather than just taking advantage of an opportunity. And I bet we'll add some more stuff around this in the future. I really would like to do something where it's sort of like, oh, you know, if you've got two people with like matching radmorphs, then you can do some other thing, and some cool stuff we'll be able to add in the future, I think. This was some of the very early prototypes that came out of some of these ideas. So like this idea of having a personalized experience, having the assets and this kind of stuff. I had to put this. So this is, this was an early form of Jetty. I'm still fond of him, but it was not universally praised.
It was I think it was the nipples that got most people internally.
I thought about putting a little like black bar on the slide here just so I wouldn't make anybody uncomfortable, but it was,
just like, cool, it's a monkey. Why has it got nipples?
Yeah, first concept of this, then we went back and we're like, sort of like, okay, maybe we should do a different animal, and we ended up with the otter. And who doesn't like an otter? Like that was like everyone's like, let's do the otter. So that's how Jetty ended up being. I'm sure people are going to ask, where did the name Jetty come from? I honestly don't know. It's just like we were working with Ustwo, and at some point, like I realized in retrospect, like we had just been calling the idea of the guide animal Jetty, and someone came up with it during the brainstorming, but I literally don't know who it was at this point.
I like it because it's a launching off point, right? A Jetty is a launching off point.
So yeah, we like. I think this kind of expressed some of the key concepts. We're like, we knew RadQuest needed to have this notion of a personalized guide, someone that kind of basically like represents us. Like, when members of RDX Works, when we sit down with people and we talk to them about why we think what we're working on is so great, it tends to really be effective. People are like, wow, yeah, this is cool. And they kind of get involved or whatever. Yeah. We wanted to have some scalable representative that would sort of represent that. And so that's what the guide was about, and this is kind of like what that chat interface thing ended up. And then also you kind of get into the asset system. And this was another one of these ideas of like this idea of collectible gemstones seemed like a really cool one that I hadn't seen anybody really exploring. People, inherently understand the idea of collecting of gemstones. And they added this interesting aspect of sort of texture and reality and organicness to the thing, which ended up leading to the whole radmorph system they've got. So these were some of the very early concepts with some of the colors. As I said, Jetty was a really important point of having education with a personal touch. So Jetty is the Radix guide. You're going to see him throughout the experience. He's always kind of the face that's helping reinforce concepts and, basically just sort of, making this so it isn't just a bunch of like rabid crypto people that are talking to you about sort of decentralization and self-custody and all this kind of stuff. It's sort of like, look, this is actually something that you're going to experience that has real meaning to you at a personal and everyday level. And so he's always representing that viewpoint. And I think we're going to do some stuff with Jetty. If you come to like Singapore, we're going to have, an interest. We're going to have a little Jetty statue and stuff. He's pretty cool. Then the asset system. So you'll see this with RadQuest. This was like one of the, I think this is the first time that we kind of put together the notion of the system, of the collect and combine, the details of this, the idea that you're going to be like earning these raw elements and earning these cards, and then you could interact with a smart contract to turn those elements into rad gems, and then you combine these things together into a radmorph. And the idea was that the radmorph would represent both. There would be this aspect of discovery, like as you're getting these things, some were more rare or more interesting than others. Some would be limited edition. So there'd be some of that, but there would also be some choice. You don't really see it here, but where we ended up with this was the idea that you would combine two different colors and materials of these gems, and that would customize how the thing would look. So, if your whole personal thing is you really like, purple and green, you can kind of try to shop for those gems and build your radmorph out of those things and get something that feels like it's really yours in the end.
And there was a few things that went into the thinking here. Like, it wasn't defined what the game or the economic mechanics of this were going to be at this point. It was just that we need several different elements or objects that could be like the user had control over, that could then create an output that was desirable with different levels of rarities. And you need enough different elements in that to create your sort of like your combinatorial matrix that would give you an output of like how many types of things you could have.
Right.
And it couldn't be too small, because then you wouldn't have rarities. If it couldn't be too big, because then the universe that was possible was too large for people to like really hold in their head what they cared about. And so like
it also limited sort of how interesting the thing can be.
Right.
Because it's like if you have a million, if technically there's a million variations of it, but those variations don't really seem interesting, then who cares?
Right.
So this was one of the really cool things that Ustwo came out with, was this idea. We found a really interesting balance where there's a lot of work that went into this. Like this is an example of one of the radmorphs. This is actually one if you combine two of these rad gems, so it's the same color. But we really like this idea of having something that was like this organic 3D object, rather than like every NFT collection out there. Basically, they have like this pixel art where they just kind of like flatten together, like there's some eyes and there's a hat and there's a scarf, and they just kind of like they overlay it, and so they can algorithmically then generate all the different variations of this thing. So we're like, we still wanted something you could have thousands of variations, and we do. We've got like, to begin with, I think it's like 3,300 different possible radmorphs.
3,300 for those who don't speak American.
Don't speak American. But we also want these things to ultimately be interesting. So like the Ustwo folks had this really clever thing where they basically built this script in this 3D package called Blender, where you could literally feed like the rad gem and card parameters into this Blender model, and it would create the object and then spit out this rendered video of the thing. And we basically turned this server loose on this for, I forget how many days it was. It basically like, okay, here's the final output of what we want. And it just sat there and just churned these things out for days. And then they literally like sent us like a hard drive of the videos of everything that came out of this. And so like now we distilled those things down to animated WebP images, and all this stuff is up on Arweave. So we wanted to show, kind of as a reference design for builders, we wanted to make these things decentralized.
Right.
So there wasn't just sort of like, all right, these aren't just like pointing at some image on the RDX Works server. It's like we actually put them on Arweave. So now we basically paid the lifetime server fee on Arweave. So those images are always going to be served no matter who owns the NFT. And all 3,000 some variations of those things are out there on Arweave. That was actually a pretty expensive Arweave bill.
Supporting the Arweave community. That's what we like to do.
For sure. I like Arweave. I really do. I think they're like a very, very cool platform for what they're doing.
100%.
So yeah, that was the radmorphs, and then they did some cool renders, and this is, you can see it kind of starting to solidify down to the form of RadQuest that we're launching here. So you can still see that there's some variations. If you go to the real thing, it's like some of these little details have gotten filled in, more information about like the quest rewards and stuff like this. But Ustwo really defined some of the fundamental elements of this that we were really happy with. And after that, basically, it went to implementation, which is, it's like, after you've gone through all this product discovery, implementation is always sort of an interesting handoff. And it's not like, the developer folks were uninvolved at this point. Like when we had our kickoff with us too, we represented everybody. We represented product input, design input, development input, because good product philosophy is basically, if you're discovering a product, you need to make sure all those things are represented. You might have to make sure it's going to be usable. You have to make sure it's implementable. Even if you don't exactly know how you're going to build it, you have to know that, yeah, this is going to be possible within the time frame we need. So we went into this after this discovery process. We're like, yep, we know what we have to do now. It was still months of work, and it was still really it was still a significant development, because it was, part of it was just we couldn't help ourselves. Like, we came out with sort of like a simple form of RadQuest. It's like, okay, you're going to click through these things, you'll get these elements, you can combine them, and then you'll finish. And then as we started going into some of the optimization of this, like literally within the team, and again, this is a sign of a good product team, was that even the people that are just writing code are going, hey, I know we're supposed to do it this way, but like, wouldn't it be cool if this was the way it worked? And then we kind of we do a little bit of user feedback on that, and people are like, yeah, actually that creates a lot more engagement if you do it that way. Okay, we can get that in. Let's do it that way. And then we also engaged with this guy that you and I both have known for a while, named Brian Tinsman, who does a huge amount of tuning of gamified systems. He's done like tabletop games and video games and collector card games and all this kind of stuff, of like tuning the economics of these systems.
Yeah, I mean,
and we pulled him in on this.
He did stuff with Magic the Gathering, right?
Exactly right, which is like the classic thing where he's like, if you tune the power of a card wrong in Magic, it's sort of like, it just throws all the tournaments off, and you have to like obsolete a whole release of the cards because you don't want it's a big business deal.
Yeah, and I think that this goes back to what we were saying before, is there was two steps. The first step one was defining how you could have a asset system that resulted in objects that were collectible. And then step two is then working out how you tune the parameters of that to make sure that things were rare but achievable, things were like things that feels like there's user optionality and control in things. And that could also create this idea of being able to go, well, I haven't got exactly the thing I want here, but I can go somewhere else. I can go onto, sort of Trove or an NFT marketplace, and I can go and get the thing I want and come back, and I can combine it to actually what I want to achieve. Mm-hmm. And so huge amount of really interesting statistical work that went into designing and tuning those parameters.
Yeah, totally. It was, and that happened pretty late in the process. Actually, it's like we already kind of we knew what the quest flow was going to be like. We knew, like you said, we knew kind of like the outlines of this asset system. But once we started digging into it, it's like, hey, there's all actually these really important choices about, one of the interesting things, like Brian did this, he basically built this master spreadsheet where it would just simulate the output of RadQuest. You basically be like, okay, we're going to hand these things up in these quests. Here's like the definition of how often you generate what things at what rarity, and the gems and the radmorph cards, the whole thing. You put this in here, and it would just spit out the output. It would give you this like histogram of average user walks away with this. And we found out that it was like, it was really easy to, we really wanted to take this seriously. We wanted these NFTs to not be something we're like, oh, okay, cool, I got some Radforce, I never care about these things again. Right. We wanted people to actually feel like, yeah, I actually really care about getting a cool Radmorph. And so we would find, like, one example was, in one of the early forms of the flow of this, we have this basically a toy dex you're going to see, Jetty Swap. And Jetty Swap, it basically is built like Uniswap. I mean, it literally is like Uniswap. It's just, but all it trades are these like fake tokens. And it just shows you the experience of what it's like to connect the wallet and do a swap and see guarantees and all that kind of cool stuff. And so to enable that, what we did is we said, when you went to the quest, we had Jetty give you some clams and be like, here's clams. I love clams. I'm going to give you some clam tokens. And then you go on to Jetty Swap, and you could swap the clams for some elements. And we did this to keep it simple. It's like, we didn't want to create too many tokens. So we're like, we'll swap it from elements, and elements we've already got that token. The elements get used to combine the rad gems, and those go into radmorphs. And what we realized at the end of it, we were like, oh shit, basically, like, we have a clam faucet because we needed to like hand out clams freely so you could do the swaps. And once you had a clam faucet, you could freely swap those into elements, which basically meant it basically completely ruined the rarity of the entire NFT system. You could basically just turn clams into everything. Right. I was like, oh crap, we can't do this. So we invented this like otter coin, which is like, okay, now you're just swapping between clams and otter coin, and both of those are completely dissociated from the rest of the NFT system. once we'd done that basic level of stuff, then we got into all this like mathematics of basically like how do you make sure you don't have too many elements and all that kind of stuff.
Complete aside, I don't know if you know this, but the word clams in idiomatic London slang means money.
Yeah. Okay. I was wondering if this was an Americanism. Same thing here. Yeah. It's like, yeah. How much is that? 50 clams, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah.
Maybe it's from America. Maybe I
always thought it was like sort of like 30s gangster talk or something like that.
Yeah.
Lettuce, clams.
So like, it's everything runs deeper than you think it does just from the naming. It's good. I love it.
Naming in particular, you would not believe, like, you look at anything, any public name that's associated with Radix, and I guarantee there are multiple hours of conversation inside the company that's basically like unnecessary. It's not like, I mean, it's not distracting from the work or everything, but it's basically like once we finish the work, we're staying late on the meeting for like an extra 2 hours to like really debate the naming because it's just so compelling. And it's like we really like every one of our names, we want to feel like, well, you know, does this really feel right with this other thing? Does it set the right impression? Does it fit with these other metaphors that we've created? Like, we go nuts on this stuff. But yeah, I mean, I come back to this. I mean, the mathematics end of this actually ended up being a lot more complicated than I thought it was. But the result of it was that, you know, you're going to have users that go through this. And when you end up with a radmorph that says, this is a superb fire tornado radmorph of quality, you know, 70 out of 100, it's like you feel like that's really, that's meaningful. Like this isn't just like, they're just making up some numbers. It's sort of like, no, you really have something that very few people have, if anybody. And we took that quite seriously and making sure, because we did want this something that could take on a life of its own. Like I would like to have this be something that, because, you know, if nothing else from our point of view, this just helps explain Radix all the better. Because if you can go through RadQuest and you can get some cool radmorphs, and then immediately you go out to ecosystem dApps, and you go like, oh, cool, I'm going to this DEX, and oh, hey, check that out. There's actually like, there's a pair between XRD and element tokens, and I can like find out what the market value of element tokens is, or there's like, or these things are listed on an NFT exchange. Like, there's no reason these things can't happen, and it just explains why Web3 is so powerful, that even toy mechanisms can be used for real things. So, yeah.
So thank you so much, Matt. That is everything to do with the making of RadQuest, or at least, you know, an hour and some on the making of RadQuest. Obviously, a lot of work, time, and effort has gone into this. It's been fabulously helpful for input into our core products that have been built for the Radix network, and also for making sure that we have this evergreen system that is going to help people onboard into Radix. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this. It was a long one. I hope that some of the builders out there in the ecosystem take away from this some stuff about thinking about user onboarding, thinking about gamification, thinking about incentivization. All of this stuff, I think, you can go deep on, and there's so much here to be able to just pull from and put into your own applications as well. So thank you very much for your time, and go use RadQuest.